Welcome to the operations of marketing. If we're honest with ourselves, this is kind of what we expect. And to be clear, it's what we marketers expect marketing to be. It's how we'd really like to think we operate. But interestingly, it's not now the perception of marketing that many executives have. According to a relatively recent study by consulting firm McKinsey, CEOs actually have a newfound respect for the operations of marketing as a driver of growth. In their minds, marketing is no longer simply the place where fantastical ideas are tried out, nobody ever has a bad idea, and everybody's idea gets put up on the refrigerator with a note saying how wonderful it is, and instead looks a little more like this. Marketing as a factory of ideas, a place where once we figure out a way to mass produce something, well, we can replicate it a million times and simply create an algorithm to scalability and growth. As one former CEO in the McKinsey research was quoted as saying, the CMO used to work in a world very different from the rest of the executives. Marketing was more of a craft, not as measurable. Data has changed how the C-suite is interacting with marketing now. It's very hard to separate the company strategy from the marketing strategy. So, which one should it be? Well, the answer is, of course, it's probably some kind of balance of both. But how do we know how to balance this operation? You can't stop it to look. In order to understand any process, you have to move with it. You have to join with it and introduce new things into that process. And that is what makes the art and science of marketing operations one of the most important parts of a successful marketing strategy. And now that the creation, production, and activation of content is at the heart of marketing, well, it means that the new idea of content operations is at the heart of marketing operations. Getting it right means we get to act like this and produce this, the art and science of marketing. Welcome to episode 5 of Marketing Makers, the series for those that make marketing work. I'm Robert Rose, and I'm your host. And whether you're an independent consultant, a director at a Fortune 100, or a newly appointed CMO, we're all marketing makers. And this month, we're talking about the magic of making content work in a business. In a word, operations. The balance of how we put people, processes, and technology together to make sure we're not just saying creative things, but saying them in a way that communicates effectively. So let's get things started, and to do that, I need to get up to our Marketing Makers Lab where we can get things underway. Welcome to Marketing Makers. Oh, hi. Hi, everybody. I've got my accountant hat on here, and my finance is, well, I'm not good at math. Welcome to the Marketing Makers Lab. It's here that we explore in depth the background behind some of marketing's historical concepts and how they've evolved into some of today's most modern of approaches. And today, well, you can see I'm just confused. I was trying to figure out how to make this advertising number the equal of number of hours that I'm going to spend and how much the agency's cost is going to figure. You know what? This new technology and all that stuff, I'm hoping something can help me here. Got all that? It's a mess. So what I really need someone who's smart about the structure of all the teams that I have to do the research into our markets, figure out the right workflows, the processes, the measurement strategy, all that easy stuff that we have in marketing. Well, as it turns out, there's a whole function of marketing that does all of that, and it's called marketing operations. Now, you might be saying to yourself, isn't that just marketing? I mean, is that really a separate thing? Well, For many of you, it might not be a separate thing. I mean, really, if you think about it, marketing operations is just, well, how the function of marketing operates. So inherently, even if the only thing I do as a marketer is create content for my blog and buy search ads, aren't I doing marketing operations? Well, the answer to that is a qualified yes. But for many larger organizations, marketing operations is a full-fledged and important aspect of how marketing departments work. Now, the idea of creating a function within the marketing department to handle the financial aspects of engaging with agencies, helping with the accounting, along with the project management, the assistance with helping to build the infrastructure, well, it's been around since marketing departments started. But the concept really grew inside of businesses starting in the 1950s and 1960s. It was then that the whole idea of marketing science began to become popular, and the perception of marketing really began to change and tilt more toward that science. In fact, the Marketing Science Institute was established in 1961, and it began to develop a number of new, highly scientific tools such as multidimensional scaling and stochastic modeling and causal modeling and decision calculus marketing. And if you've got no idea what any of those things are, if all those things sound a little weird and a little, like eggheady and weird, well, because they are, and they were at the time. But it's evolved. And beyond adding sophisticated analysis and marketing research, this trend of marketing science really got its legs underneath it in the 1970s and 1980s. And the concept of profiling customers or developing much deeper research into markets, well, that became a big thing. And it was at this point that marketing departments in business began building their own teams who would not only handle some of the research projects, but some of the more complex financial analysis into the ongoing development of computer technology within the marketing department. And this became known as modern marketing operations. In those days, marketing operations was really all about how to operate most efficiently. It helped build marketing strategy with metrics and measurement and business processes and best practices and budgeting and ongoing research to develop the best creative and media strategy. But then it morphed again. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, as the digital age began to come around, well, this new trend swept the idea of marketing, and it was called CRM, Customer Relationship Management. Now, CRM, or Customer Relationship Management, was truly the offspring of what was called database marketing back in the 1980s. Now, businesses could track what was purchased, who purchased it, and also could begin to automate some of the messaging that might come from those purchases. Customer Relationship Management. This transformed marketing operations again into a completely new idea, where marketing operations would now start to utilize technology to not only manage financial analysis, but also the more complex technology and workflow aspects of this new automated digital approach to marketing. And this gave birth to a new type of enterprise technology tool called Marketing Resource Management, or MRM system. Now, if you can imagine, in the early 2000s, MRM software was very big and very popular. The core foundation of MRM was workflow. How do we make marketing operations more efficient? But of course, and this may come as a surprise to many of you, that these technologies we use and take for granted today, they were born out of this whole MRM idea. That's right, the early MRM systems were not only workflow systems that enabled things like marketing calendars and resources to be assigned to tasks, but also financial systems and the management of digital assets and the ability to take digital content and publish it and print it and email it on demand. Then they began to take on other tasks, such as automatically sending email based on triggers as purchases or sign up to loyalty events. Doesn't that sound a little familiar? Well, that's right. The MRM systems of the early 2000s performed many of the same functions as today's workflow systems, digital asset management systems, marketing automation, even content management systems. So what happened? Well, in a word, content happened, and specifically digital content. As the 2000s kicked into high gear here, we started to see websites, blogs, landing pages, emails, social media, mobile technologies, and all of these content-driven marketing experiences driving the marketing departments. These technologies began to separate out into their own as well. We saw the meteoric rise of marketing automation because marketing operations needed a better way to manage the email channel. We saw the rise of web content management to manage big and complex websites. We saw digital asset management rise to the core way we manage all these digital files that marketing was creating. And so there was a split. Marketing operations began to more and more focus on the resources, the financial analysis, and the overall research-focused areas of the marketing operations. And the content tools, well, they began to create multiple silos in the business. In some ways, they became the department that we now know as digital marketing. And in some companies, they became the web team or the digital technology team. And to this day, we still see many of these splits occurring. But change is starting to happen. As content marketing and content strategy has become a much more strategic operational function within businesses, we're seeing the growth of a new breed of marketing operations. It is content operations. In today's digital world, without a superior customer experience, there is no product. Sitecore is the only digital experience company that brings together content, commerce, and data into one connected platform for brands and delivers millions of connected digital experiences every day. Start creating more human connections with your customers through a digital experience with end-to-end content, seamless e-commerce, and continuous personalization. So content operations and how we think of it, well, it stems from the roots of marketing operations. And in fact, in many ways, the business case for functions like content marketing or content strategy are being made because of the roots of marketing automation. When we look at today's financial analysis of marketing operations, the cost of content is probably the most expensive line item that there is. Everyone creates content these days, from the web team to the marketing automation demand gen team to the content marketing team to the agencies, the executives, the frontline account representatives, human resources in their effort to recruit people, even accounting people with invoices, contracts, onboarding, documentation. In fact, it's probably easier to count all the people who don't create some kind of digital communication. In other words, everybody creates content. But it's probably the one line item in marketing that isn't counted as part of our financial analysis. In fact, it simply just gets lumped into other buckets. But is that even possible? I mean, some might say content is a meaningless word. They might argue that trying to create a content strategy or content operation is kind of like trying to create a word strategy or a word operation. There's just no way to get your arms around it these days, much less put a strategic operation behind it. The difference, of course, is that in the old days of marketing operations, the overarching challenge was what we want to say. There were only a few places, namely radio, television, and print, that we could say it. And it was a one-way street. We were trying to figure out what to say on these channels and on these marketing operations, and all they were trying to figure out was where all these people were collected. Well, now, the primary concern of content operations is both what we want to say and, quite frankly, where we want to say it at scale. There are hundreds, thousands of places to say it, and we're dealing with data-driven micro-segments of audiences and looking at contextual variables such as mobile or desktop or physical location or affinity or other content, as well as all the other mechanisms of how and when to deliver this message. Yeah, that's right. Marketing science is coming back. And we have to figure out a way to say it in multiple languages and consistently across myriad functional teams such as brand, sales, accounting, HR, and all those other areas where we want and need to say important things. So what are content operating models, and how do businesses deal with that?
There are a number of reasons why it's important, and I think of content operations in regards to metrics and measurement, but also in regards to content quality. You need to have a solid basis for measuring the quality of your content and seeing if it's actually meeting your business goals. And of course, it's really important to define your business goals before you do anything else. So if we have metrics in place, if we have a style guide in place that's supposed to be followed, if we have terminology that is supposed to be followed, these are all part and parcel of that backdrop, or even you can think of it as the foundation upon which things are built. So we need to share these common pieces like writing style, like terminology, to make sure that our content measures up. And especially in this day and age where our upper management is always looking for justification for why to spend money on content of any type, it's critical that you can provide those types of metrics to support your case. So the metrics could be quality scores. That's one. The metrics could be other types of things that you collect, perhaps in your web analytics. Really important things to pay attention to and to address to make sure that everyone in the organization is achieving the business goals of the organization. So don't cut corners when it comes to having a plan of action, that operating plan for your content groups. Then on top of that, you can build a great strategy, and then you can have great execution.
I love what Val said there, and she's got an amazing new book on content personalization that you definitely need to check out. So, what does content operations even look like? Well, recently we established a bit of a new framework for companies to consider when looking to structure their content operations. Much like marketing operations looked at finance, research, workflow, and resource management, we also looked at the distinct functions that content operations would solve that might have some overlap to marketing operations, but quite frankly would solve the unique needs of creating, managing, organizing, and activating all of those different content in the business. So we came up with 4 internal operational models that exemplify content operations. Each model has a different investment strategy, an optimal team structure, discrete measurement goals, and a roadmap. Thus, organizing and balancing your operations against the models you pursue, that's what's going to give you the ability to deliver a clearer content strategy. So let's take a look at them. These are what we call the 4 operating models of content. When a content strategy succeeds, it typically happens in one or more of these 4 content operating models. They operate along 2 axes. So on the lower part of the y-axis, the model is more internally focused versus moving up to an external focus or building audiences that can be monetized over time. Now along the x-axis, along the bottom, the models are departmental, like siloed services, and they shade further into a fully integrated business service as they move further to the right. So to be clear, This model, these 4 quadrants, are not meant to imply maturity or value. Each model, each quadrant has a unique value to provide to the business. And each has its roles, responsibilities, output, integration structure, measurement goals, etc. The goal is not to move as much as it is to structure and ultimately scale the strategic operation in a balanced and clear way against the goals of the business. So for the purpose of this show, the quick and easy way to explain and distinguish the models is to look at the output. So, first, we have what we call the player content model. In the lower left quadrant, the player model is certainly the most common. Often here we've got 2 or 3 people, although it can be many more, that are tasked with fulfilling the needs of the business by creating, producing, and merchandising content into the business. The player model team creates infographics and ebooks and sales sheets and blog posts and often presentations for the CEO. The team is the creator of assets, sometimes the internal content factory for the business. As an example of this model, you might read how software company Symantec evolved from a player campaign-focused business model where they were producing lots and lots and lots of assets into more of a product center of excellence model managing distinct publications. Now, let's move to the right and we'll talk about the processor content model. In the lower right quadrant, this processor model is content as a service. Internally focused, this model leans more toward an integrated business service that the whole company uses. Maybe it's a team or teams that work on SEO strategy, localization, scalability, best practice guidelines, protocols, etc. They set standards for how content will be created and managed by other elements of the organization or by outsourced agencies. Great example of this is how Dusty DiMercurio leads a content enablement team at Autodesk. As he said when I asked him about this.
So what is content operations? The way I see content operations is I think it's actually one of the most essential functions to scale and align content strategy across an organization. I think central to a content operations function is includes sort of your core strategy for content. It also can include things like, your target audiences, relevant insights around those audiences to make sure you know what's important to them, their primary challenges, and so on and so forth. Also central to your strategy needs to be an aligned customer lifecycle that sort of breaks down the different stages of the relationship that you have with your customers, across their journey and experience with you. This is really, really important part too, because this ultimately allows you to create contextual content, right? So content that is aligned with your audience's needs, and those needs change across their journey with you. I would say another core component to content operations function are essentially like guidelines related to content. So these things can include content creation guidelines themselves, different processes that you may document, taxonomy for tagging your content appropriately by lifecycle, by persona, et cetera. And can also include things like, who's responsible for what. So defining sort of roles and responsibilities for content creators really where appropriate across your business. I'd say one of the other really important components of a content operations function is really thinking about sort of goals and KPIs related to content, right? And these may change across the customer lifecycle too. So for example, measuring, top of funnel, sort of like thought leadership content to build your brand, for example, is going to require a very different set of measures in place to understand whether you're achieving your goals or not, versus content that's, closer to driving direct conversion, right? That'll have a different set of metrics associated with them. So so I guess in short, I think content operations is really an essential function for scaling content and scaling a content strategy really across any size organization, large or small.
And then there's the product content model. So moving into the upper left quadrant is the product model. This is where the focus is on building external audiences through content products. There may be an editorial team here that manages a resource center or a dedicated blog, magazine, or video channel. Discrete, immersive experiences that are aimed at building and moving audiences. The critical difference here is in how content products support the business and must be managed like a cohesive strategic offering of the business rather than just a simple feed of assets that support marketing campaigns. Wonderful example of this is how software company Frontline created its original research institute. There, they've been creating a ton of new leads through a discrete product called their Frontline Research Institute, providing original research and guidance to operators in schools. That moves us to the upper right, or the platform content model. And this one is the platform or content as a business model. Now here, content is not only created as a marketing and sales tactic, but might be an integrated product or even a business strategy. The platform model itself could have a revenue stream. Examples here, of course, range from everything that we know and love, such as Red Bull Media House and the way that they've completed a completely separate division of their company, to Johnson & Johnson's BabyCenter.com, which was an acquisition that they've made extraordinarily popular and successful. And then there's Arrow Electronics, the distributor of electronics parts, and their creation of a media division that now has acquired 53 magazine, websites, email newsletters, all of them in the electrical engineering space. Arrow Electronics, quite simply, is the biggest media company in the electrical engineering space. Now, this is not, again, a maturity model. It's tempting to look at it that way. It's tempting to look at the 4 operating models across this maturity scale where you start with baby steps in the player model and then grow up to be a platform model content business. While there is some element of truth in this, like you normally start out in that player model and have some aspirations perhaps to the platform model, it's misleading to see these as stages. The idealized content operating system can really be seen as a clear, shared, and rightfully balanced combination of all 4 models for whatever the business strategy is. Great example of this is Cleveland Clinic's content team. They are still, quite frankly, the main creator of all the content for the hospital's websites, ads, posters, the hallways, all that stuff. Their focus has always been on scaling the measurement and the value of content. Now, they're most famous for moving into the platform model over the last few years, where they've monetized and staffed Health Essentials blog, creating a completely separate division of the business. And now as we enter 2021, well, they're squarely developing a deeper processor model where they're looking to scale personalization of healthcare. So it's not a question of which one you are now and how you grow to a new model as quickly as possible. Rather, the intelligent content operational strategy is about which balance of the 4 content model makes sense for you, both today and tomorrow. And well, that's what we're after, isn't it? When it comes to content and marketing, we really want to feel like this: creative, free, ready to play and offer new things to the world. But we want to operate like this too: scalable, measurable, efficient, and able to deliver what the business needs. You see, with the right content operating model in place, content operations, you can scale and measure enterprise content. As you might expect, we see the future of strategic content marketing as a scalable, measurable business strategy. As we move through 2021 and beyond, we can already see this trend accelerating. It is the strategic use of content that will not only build audiences and drive the creation and retention of customers, but can ultimately do so at a profit for the business. When we get into the question of how much did we spend on content, well, we can not only answer that question succinctly and accurately, but maybe, just maybe, we add an additional question. How much did we make on content? Until I see you next month, remember folks, it's your story to tell. Tell it well.